getting the slides afterwards to make sure that we're touching on everything, please know that that's going to be coming your way. So what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with metrics to analyze in order to set strategic goals. That's going to touch on growth in terms of donors and donations. And we're also going to touch on another, a little bit more complex metric, but equally, actually more important, in my opinion, than growth, called lifetime value, donor lifetime value. After that, we'll move on to effective ways to segment your donor database, right? You have all that information, you store all that information about your donors. Now let's try and figure out some ways to actually break it down so we can get some insights. So we'll look at acquired donors, lapsed donors, and downgraded donors. And then we're going to tie everything together with a little segment of the presentation I call "This is Nice, But." So when do we actually apply these concepts, and where do I actually start? What is the actual next step when I get back to the office or close out of this presentation? So metrics to analyze to set strategic goals. The first one, donor and donation growth. In this case, we're going to stick with explicitly growth rate. And what this is, donor and donation growth rate, it's a percentage change either in donations or donors over any period of time. We'll touch on that more in a moment here. This is most frequently measured in terms of annual or year-over-year change. So we're going to talk about growth rate, but the most important piece from this slide to take away is that growth rate can be calculated over any time period. You'll always, 9 out of 10 times, see that in terms of annual growth rates. But you could theoretically look at how quickly are we growing from January to February, or from quarter 1 to quarter 2, or from this week to last week. The reason we look at annual in particular, either annual or quarterly, is because you get a larger set of data, right? It wouldn't be fair to compare your December donation totals to your November donation totals, because of course, end of year giving, it's going to show this humongous increase in growth, and that's not going to happen again in January, right? So that's why we try to look at things in a little bit of a broader perspective. What you can see here on your screen, the visualization, that's actually from Fundraising Report Card. And what you may notice is what's highlighted there is the donor growth rate of just the 5,000 and above segment. And we'll touch on that in a bit here. Now, why is growth rate so important? Most everyone, probably everyone on this presentation, is familiar with the Giving USA annual report, right? The headlines from last year looked something along these lines, right? Donations grow 4% to $373 billion. Americans donate $373 billion. That's 4% more than the previous record. Americans donated an estimated $358. They all have different numbers. Total giving grew 4.1% in current dollars. There's a reason that those metrics, that 4%, 4%, 4%, there's a reason that's in the headlines, every year. That is how quickly our sector, our industry, nonprofits are growing. So you'll want to know that internally, right? When you think about your fundraising plan, when you think about what's realistic for fiscal year 17 or calendar year 17, or even a few months from now, looking towards 2018, when we're planning for long-term, high-level strategic goals, we need to know our growth rate. We need to know historically how well have we been performing. So I'll pose the question, do you know what your organization's growth rate was last year? The year before that? Segmented, right? We want to know, our under $100 annual fund donors, are we growing more rapidly there than we are with our major donors, in terms of that rate? That's information that can all kind of tie into that plan that you coordinate, that you create, so that when you are putting out all those small fires throughout the year, at least they're all aligning with your overarching goal, which is increase growth by 5% or 10%, something along those lines. The whole idea here is to set realistic goals for growth, right? And this is going to be information that if you can incorporate this either in a staff meeting, if you're working with other colleagues, or take this information to a board meeting when you have the opportunity to talk about development and the goals for the year. Having these numbers, the historical context, will allow you to provide a better foundation for what you're going to do in the following year. You'll get more buy-in internally. So how do you calculate your growth rate? Growth rate is actually very, very simple. You're only going to need two numbers, either your total donation revenues from this year and your total donation revenues from last year, or your total donors from this year and your total donors from last year. Let's stick with donors here just for a moment. So your donor growth rate would be your X, which is your donors from this year. How many donors did we have this year? Minus how many donors did we have last year divided by the total number of donors we had last year, then multiplied by 100 to give you that nice percentage. So right now in this moment, you would take your 2016 total count of donors, subtract that from your 2015 total count of donors, divide by your 2015 total count of donors, multiply by 100, and you would have your 2016 donor growth rate. The same concept applies when you're looking at this in terms of donations, right? Instead of donor numbers, donor counts, it would be donation, in terms of revenues, dollars. So that's our first metric. Hopefully relatively straightforward. One that you may already be calculating internally, but a relatively simple one to get started with. Next, we'll move on to lifetime value. And lifetime value, admittedly, is more complex than growth, but it's unbelievably powerful. So donor lifetime value is a projection of future revenues from a given donor based on a few inputs, which are average donation amount, donation frequency, and average years of actual giving. You may also hear me refer to that as lifespan, how long a donor maintains a relationship with your organization. So what you can see here is a little visualization that you get from Fundraising Report Card. It gives you your donor lifetime values, and then of course broken down by those segments. But let's dive in. What is donor lifetime value, and how can we get our hands on it within our organization? And then once we have our hands on it, what is it used for? Why are we measuring lifetime value? You'll also hear me refer to it as LTV. Unlike other metrics, LTV is forward-looking. LTV predicts something very important. It predicts revenues. It assigns a dollar amount to the relationship you will have with your donors into the future. Maybe thinking to yourself, well, how can you do that? How can you assign a dollar amount on a donor into the future? That information can help you effectively budget. And it's an important moment here to note that we're not actually going to calculate donor ID 1234 is worth $5,000 if you maintain a relationship with them. We're going to segment this out. We'll touch on that a bit more in a moment here. But when you paired that value, that LTV value, with another metric, one that we're not going to get too involved with here today, but called donor acquisition cost, you can actually start to gauge something called, in the for-profit world, business model viability. But it's the same exact concept in the nonprofit, in the development space. The example here is if you're acquiring donors at a cost of $50 per donor, and your donor lifetime value of that segment of donor is $75, you would be profitable. Think about this just for a moment here. If you're acquiring new annual fund donors, for example, and it costs you $50 per donor to get the mailing sent out, and the initial donation, the average donation amount you get back from that appeal that you send out is $20, you would immediately think, well, we lost money on that investment. We spent $50 to acquire that donor, and they only donated $20. But the lifetime value of that donor, in this case, is $75. What that's telling you is as you build and maintain that relationship with that donor, their value to the organization into the future is actually $75. So in the long term, you're profitable. You spent $50 to make $75. That's lifetime value. So you can look at it here in this very simple graph, right? Over on the left, we have the donor acquisition cost, the cost to acquire a donor. And over on the right, we have the gross value or the lifetime value of the donor. You always want your pendulum, or you want your chart to swing this way. You always want acquisition costs to be less than the lifetime value of a donor. The opposite, okay, if donor acquisition cost is $100 and lifetime value is $75, you're in the red, right? That one's obvious. Each new donor is actually a $25 loss that you're acquiring. So again, this idea here, if that same appeal you sent out cost $100 to acquire each new donor, and each new donor still just made a $20 initial average donation, that would be telling you we lost $80 on the surface. In actuality, when you factor in the lifetime of that donor's giving to the organization, you're losing $25. Regardless, it's still a loss, but it's a new way to approach this. It's a new perspective to look at what you're doing. It's less in the moment and more of a long-term perspective. So on the left, if cost to acquire a donor acquisition cost, if it outweighs the lifetime value of a donor, it's not sustainable. It's not a good way to grow the organization. So LTV is not easy to calculate. I will preface what we're about to go into with that, but it is unbelievably valuable. And I promise we will touch on some ways that everyone here who is time-strapped at a smaller shop can get their hands on it. But first, an example, Starbucks, right? LTV is not specific to fundraising and development. LTV, we use it internally at our company here. Lifetime value is a really powerful metric. So at Starbucks, the lifetime value of a customer is $14,000. It's a little bit more. It's like $14,300. So that means over the lifetime of a customer's relationship with Starbucks, they're giving them $14,000 in revenues. That is ridiculous, right? Like that is a lot of money to spend at Starbucks. I hope I don't fit into that $14,000 amount. I hope I'm below that, but that's the reality. So if Starbucks spends $1,000 to acquire a new customer, that's amazing, right? That's a great return on investment. I'll spend $1,000 to bring in 14,000. That's net positive $13,000. That's amazing. That's the power of lifetime value, right? Because if we all imagine for a moment our first ever order at Starbucks, it was probably like a, cappuccino, frappuccino, caramel latte, whatever it was probably not $14,000 worth of coffee that we purchased, even if you get some of the pastries. They have fantastic pastries, by the way, especially around pumpkin time, October. We could do a whole nother webinar on that for another time. But nonetheless, we maybe spent $10 our first trip at Starbucks, but our lifetime value, what we actually mean to the corporation, we represent $14,000 to them. So they're happy to spend $1,000 to acquire us. So let's apply that same, let's take that same spin and apply it to our donors, right? Because we, of course, everyone talks about retention, fundraising, and maintaining relationships with donors. And of course, donors will move from organization to organization. But understanding and having a good perspective on what it actually means if we do steward and maintain a long-term relationship with a donor, if we can quantify that, then we can help build a case. We can share with the board, things along those lines that gets everyone involved. Now, awesome to see. We do have one of our first questions coming in. I told you we'd make this as conversational as possible. So the question comes from Kimberly. So that's a $14,000 lifetime value, $14,000 lifetime value to Starbucks over ideally a 70+ year lifespan. Exactly, Kimberly. Now I will mention, and we do link the source here. I'll go back to the slide. You can see the source is down the bottom left. And again, I'll be sending these slides out so everyone can click through to that link or go to it right now. It's a short link. This is actually only over a 20-year period of time that they've calculated this $14,000 metric. So this is only 20 years. They capped it off. When we're looking at donor lifetime value, though, and this is one of the things we do with the fundraising report card, is we tell users, upload as much data as you have. You could potentially have donors from 30 years ago that are still maintaining a relationship with your organization, and that factors into the calculation of that lifespan, how long donors on average are maintaining a relationship with your organization, which then informs what that projection becomes. Great question, Kimberly. Okay, so here comes my apologies. This is a wall of text, and I hate doing this. As you can tell, my style is much more, one sentence at a time, but here's a wall of text. This is how you calculate, this is how you calculate lifetime value. You need these three metrics. We'll go over them briefly here. This is part of kind of the reality that calculating lifetime value on your own is not that easy. That's why there's software. That's why there's Fundraising Report Card out there. The first metric you need, that lifespan. Okay, so the lifespan is right there. It's simply the length and time that a donor maintains a relationship with your organization. Period. Average donation amount. That one's relatively simple, right? It's the average amount of donation made to your organization by all your donors, right? If you looked at your entire file, what is my average donation amount? Frequency of donation. Another simple metric here, but this is really going to be how frequently donations are made over a set period of time. You can see in parentheses there, it says, let's stick with years. You're generally going to calculate lifetime value as a yearly metric. So how many donations are donors making on average within a year? Is it 1? Is it 1.3? Is it 2 donations? Is that the average frequency? So again, not as simple as growth rate, but here you go. First little win of the day. There's a cheat sheet here. And this is going to explain everything that we've talked about with lifetime value, because even going back through these slides later, it's still going to be a lot. It's going to be heavy. Cheat sheet. Short little URL. Hopefully that's helpful to some, if not all of you who are here today. But here's our equation. Our equation is going to be lifespan times donation amount times frequency, right? So the actual equation, it's very clean, very simple, but getting those inputs is quite difficult, a little bit complex. And here's what we kind of touched on at the beginning of when we chatted about LTV, which is you don't actually calculate each individual donor's lifetime value. That's not we can't know that John Doe is going to be worth $10,000, right? We have no idea how much each individual donor is going to be worth to the organization. Nor do we actually want to look at the lifetime value of your entire file, right? We don't want to just say, okay, we have 5,000 donors. What is the lifetime value of all of our donors? Because what if one individual recently passed away and made a legacy contribution to your organization of $100,000, a six-figure gift? That's going to skew the lifetime value of your donors. So instead, you're actually going to segment this metric by giving level, right? What you'll really want to know is, if I acquire a new under $100 donor, an annual fund donor, or a $50 donor, right? You're going to want to know, if I acquire that new under $100 donor, what is the lifetime value? Because if I know what the lifetime value is of an under $100 donor, let's say it's $250, now I have an informed stance when it comes to budgeting for that appeal or budgeting for that event, right? I can say, great. If I know that each of these new annual fund donors I bring in is going to be, worth $250 to our organization, it's a projection, but it should be somewhere around there. I know not to spend more than half of that, $100, $125, to make sure that they, create and build that relationship with us. Same concept is unbelievably jaw-dropping, eye-opening when you first get your hands on it. Major donors have lifetime values that are unbelievable. I mean, the majority of organizations that I get a chance to work with through Fundraising Report Card, they'll look at their lifetime value of 5,000 and above donors, and it'll be well into the 5 figures, $50,000, $75,000. There are people in your file who are worth, close to $100,000 if you maintain that relationship with them throughout their giving. It helps inform why it's worth investing your personal time, investing money, resources into building and maintaining relationships with donors who have capacity and affinity for your organization. So there you go. The results will be eye-opening and informative. And before we go into the effective ways to segment your database, and we'll touch on this at the end, but that's all calculated within Fundraising Report Card. And that's the idea here, is that that information is relatively difficult to get at. You can do some Google searches. You can use the cheat sheet that I linked you to within the presentation here. You can calculate these on your own, and people do it. But it's a matter of time savings, and it's our hope that the Fundraising Report Card will be able to do that for you. Okay, we are through 1/3 of our materials here, so I think we're making good time. Effective ways to segment your database. So there's quite a few. I'm going to list a couple here, but there's quite a few different ways that you could, segment all that information you have about your donors, right? You could look at things by giving level. So let's stick with the LTV, for example, right? We could look at what is the lifetime value of an under $100 donor versus the lifetime value of a $100 to $250 donor, right? The under $100 donor lifetime value will be less than the $100 to $250 donor. Interesting, right? We could look by geographic region. Okay, we could say, well, giving level is interesting, but what about donors in California versus New York? Do donors in California have a greater lifetime value than donors in New York? That'd be neat to look at, wouldn't it? By performance metric. So that's the concept here of looking at lifetime value by segment of donor, right? So this performance metric, so reactivated donors versus retained donors. Do donors who are retained year over year, is their lifetime value greater than donors who have reactivated? So donors who made a contribution, then lapsed, but then came back. That'd be an interesting analysis to do, wouldn't it? So my preferred method, what I have found provides quickest and most effective insight, is by choosing two of the ones that we just went through. Geography is amazing. Geography is awesome. That's for the big higher eds of the world, the ones that have data analysis teams. Where we need some actionable insights quickly, we're going to stick to giving segment and performance metric. So let's hop into an example here. The first one's going to be acquired donors. We all know what acquired donors are, but I have a short little definition there, right? Donors who had never made a contribution to your organization until this year. We're going to stick with kind of the annual perspective here, okay? You could, of course, break this down quarterly or monthly, right? You could say donors who had never made a contribution prior to this month. What you're seeing here, another little visualization. We won't stick with it too long. We'll just dive into the meat and potatoes here. So why do we want to segment by this performance metric? Now, I am not a fundraising expert. I think one of my slides coming up is probably going to explicitly say that, if my memory serves me correctly. I am not a fundraising expert. I am a data person. But we can all probably agree, I'd love to maybe set up a poll in the future so we can get some real feedback, but we all probably agree that newly acquired donors get some sort of special treatment, right? If we want them to be retained, if we want to maintain and build that relationship, they need some sort of thank you or acknowledgement, something along those lines, right? Yeah, here you go. Perfect. I am not a fundraising professional, so I defer to you all, but I think that is a reality here. So having lists of acquired donors, so that's a performance metric, but then broken down by giving level. So we're kind of going 2 layers deep here, right? So we're talking about acquired under $50 donors, acquired 50 to 100, acquired 5,000 and above donors. Having that information at your fingertips could theoretically let you send highly targeted follow-up appeals, right? So if we had a list of all of our newly acquired, performance metric is acquired donors right now, newly acquired under $100 donors from last year, then we could send a uber targeted appeal letter to them, right? Asking them to renew. It would be worded, here you go. Thank you so much for your contribution last year. This year, consider renewing at $75 to see your impact go even further. So I've chosen kind of an arbitrary number here, $75. It's less than 100. The beautiful thing is, if you have access to your segmented average donation amount, right? If we know what the average donation amount is of your under $100 historically, under $100 donors historically, we could put that number in there, right? Because the list that we're sending to, they need to be thanked for their contribution. That's because they're an acquired donor. And then they need to be targeted for the right amount. So we're not saying, hey, you should renew at maybe 10 or 50 or 250. We're not giving them multiple options here. We're saying $75 because we know that's what they have the capacity for, the affinity for, and that's what our data is telling us is the right number. Again, not the fundraising professional. That is not me. But the idea here is to take that data and turn it into actionable insights. So the first thing, after this presentation, check your CRM. Is it easy to export an acquisition report broken down by dollar amounts? Awesome. If it is, start taking advantage of this concept. If not, talk to me. I want you to use, what we built. Why we built it is for that very reason. Lapsed donors. So the opposite of acquisition, right? So donors who made a contribution last year but did not renew this year. Again, we have another little visualization here. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into lapse because it's frankly, I don't want to say more important than acquisition, but tying in with the concepts of retention, they're both very important. Lapsed is kind of hits you in the face a little bit more. These are people who are leaving the organization. So why would we segment our database, all of that information that we've stored and organized? Why do we want to acknowledge who our lapsed donors are? It's really simple, right? Donors who had made a contribution last year and didn't renew this year, we want to recapture them. We want to reactivate them. They had shown affinity for what we do for our organization in the past. Something, I don't want to say went wrong, but something happened, and then they didn't. Let's get them back, right? Those should be relatively, I don't want to say easy, but those should be good prospects to bring back into the organization. So again, we'll want to break it down by giving level, and we'll want to look at and compare them to, we'll want to look at lapsed under $100 donors. So the first thing we're looking at here with the under $100 donors, we have a nice little screenshot from Fundraising Report Card, is we're going to see, okay, how many lost donors did we have last year in our particular segment? In this situation, for this little demo data set that I was working with, there were 152 lost donors that this organization had. Now that was 32% of their total lost donors for the year, which was 466. Now those 152 lost donors represented $21,000 in lost contributions. So it's interesting and nice seeing this information packaged like this. That's not the point though. It's just having our fingertips on this information that is relevant. Another metric there is lost potential. We'll touch on that more in a moment here. But we're going to want to compare those under $100 lapsed donors with the lapsed $100 to $250 donors, right? Are we losing more in a particular segment or less in a particular segment? And then how does that actually affect our bottom line? So you can see these $100,000 to $250,000 donors represented $56,000 in donations that are off the table. And then you'll actually start to notice some interesting things when you start to look at your lapsed segmented donors. You'll see lost potential, which I was alluding to a moment ago. And this ties in with that lifetime value, right? We're going to take the total number of lost donors in a particular segment, and then we're going to multiply that by the lifetime value of donors in that segment. So you can see for this particular organization, they may have lost 139 $100 to $250 donors, and that was $56,000 off the table year over year. But that actually represents over $250,000 in lost potential to the organization over the lifetime of those 139 donors giving. Same concept over on the under $100 side. So why is that important? Because having that data allows you to do the same thing we were just talking about with acquired donors, right? We can send the targeted appeal to bring them back. Or maybe now, seeing this lost potential, this gives you enough ammunition, gives you the justification to do some one-to-one touches with these 139 people, these 152 people, because we can now quantify how important their relationships are with us over the long term. The whole idea here is that if we can segment by performance metric, in this case lapsed, and we can break it down by giving level, we can start to create a compelling case for why we need to invest either your personal time or the organization needs to invest resources and money into the concepts of retaining donors, right? Because if the original argument was a gut feel that, we think we're losing some donors and maybe we can pull a report of, total live bunt donors from last year and we can see some trends or something like that, that's interesting. And that'll get you the conversation internally. But when you can start to have discussions about hard numbers, $250,000 off the table in lost potential, $122,000 in lost potential gone, that creates the case internally, the dialogue internally, to actually start making investments towards retention. So you can then, and here we go, this is with what we were doing with acquisition. When our performance metric was acquisition, we were sending targeted appeals for retention purposes. Well, we can do the same idea here after we've segmented the database for lapsed donors by giving level. We can send those targeted reactivation appeals. And then again, you'll be able to focus on the most important donors that need personal touches from you, right? If we had that list of all under $100 donors who had lapsed, we can send them, a reactivation appeal saying, we'd love to, learn more about your connection to the organization. Please consider coming back to joining us at a level of $50, something along those lines. But then if we break it down by giving level, and this is why it's so important to not just do one or the other, if we break it down by giving level, we can identify who are our lapsed major donors or mid-level donors, donors who are making $700 contributions. They're really important. If they're leaving the organization, they might deserve, a personal touch. That's why we go 2 levels deep here, performance metric and giving level. And here you go. Here's an example. So the same data set from fundraising report card, you can see 11 lost major donors, about $200,000 in lost donations, a lost potential of $750,000. Here you go. Yeah, 11 donors, 5,000 plus segment. There, exactly. Phone call, one-to-one meeting, whatever it is. Who are those 11 people? Within fundraising report card, you click a little button to export them back out. Go look in Kindful, go look in whatever your system is that you use, see who those 11 folks are, make sure that they show up in your reactivation dashboard next year. That's the concept here. And here you go. Data-driven fundraising isn't a silver bullet. It's not the end-all be-all. It's close, though. It's going to help you focus your attention. And that's what you may have seen and read or heard in other webinars. The whole idea here is to focus in on what's most important right now. Right person, right time. So check your CRM. Can you export these reports, with a few clicks? If you can't, again, I'm your man. That's what I do. That's why I wake up in the morning, is to help organizations get access to this information. So downgraded donors. This is the third and final performance metric that we're going to talk about. And I think we're making good time here. But again, if any questions come up, please use that questions tab. So downgraded donors. This is an interesting performance metric because these are donors who renewed this year. So it's a donor from last year who renewed their contribution this year. And that's a win. We have to acknowledge that's a win. But they decreased their amount of contributions year over year. So they renewed, but they decreased. There's a story there. There's something going on. So segmenting by downgraded donors is interesting, right? And here you go. You can see me. I think it, I write it. Donors who are retained, which is a good thing. But for some reason, they decreased their amount of giving. Poses the question, right? Why was that? It's another concept here with data-driven fundraising, is to use the data to help pose questions. So we can apply the same exact strategy. I don't want to harp on the same thing for too long, but let's apply the same strategy we used with the lapsed donor segment here. this particular organization. They had 39 downgraded major donors in 2016. Simple, right? 32 people to call. Let's export them out of fundraising report card. Let's see how much did they downgrade. Was it someone downgrading $5 or was it someone downgrading, $5,000? And then let's go back to the database. Let's figure out what's the story there. And then let's pick up the phone. And that's the entire concept here of performance metric and giving level segmentation. It's really simple on the surface. It's just hard to do on your own in application level, right? If you download all your data from your CRM, you could maybe make some pivot tables and once a year, maybe spend a couple weeks working on this. It's just tough. And that's part of why we built what we built here. But it's all based on donor behavior, right? And this is the kind of cool thing about data-driven fundraising is it doesn't have to be super complex, right? What we've covered is pretty simple. It's all based on donor behavior. Now you could, this is an awesome example, you could use a predictive model to help figure out who your best major donor prospects are, right? Some of you very well may have done that in the past. Or, my kind of preferred method is let's look at our donors' giving patterns. Let's look at their behaviors in the past, and let's see which performance metrics they fall into, because that can speak volumes to figuring out who's a major gift prospect, for example. So if you were to take a peek at all of your retained $250 and up segmented segments of donors. So donors who are maintaining a relationship with your organization and are making contributions, $250 a year, $500 a year, $1,000 a year, you would probably find in all those segments donors who have not only affinity but capacity to be major donors at your organization. It's this concept, we could either look forward thinking like we did with LTV, we can get a predictive model that tries to make predictions, or we can look historically, retroactively. Let's look at the history. What is the donor's giving patterns and behavior trying to tell us? Two ways to approach it. I think this one is a little more simple, a little easier to grasp, especially when you're time strapped. So segmenting by performance metric and giving level, hopefully we can see it's a powerful way to focus your attention in on the right thing at the right time. Okay, so we're on to our final little segment here. The aptly named "This is all nice, Zach, but ... So when do I actually apply these concepts, right? I struggle from it personally. I imagine most of us on the phone call or on the webinar do as well. I mean, how do you get past the "I don't have the time right now" kind of paradigm? How do we do that? You can see down there on the bottom left, I recently wrote a blog article for the data bank, which I think that's really relevant here. So please take a peek at that link. So it's first important to acknowledge we all have a lot on our plate. You all especially. We all have a lot on our plate. Here you go. Coordinating appeals, engaging constituents. Your program officers might ask you for help with things. So what you do, the list of responsibilities you have is long. I acknowledge that. So you may be thinking to yourself, you may be groaning, rather than cheering out from this webinar. You may be thinking, okay, this is another thing I need to add to my list. And you might add it to your list, and it, might fall down on that list. The idea, though, is that analyzing your data, this is a tricky concept, especially when you've never done it in practice, but analyzing your data will actually help you find efficiencies. Right? So you'll be able to focus your efforts on the tasks, the activities, and in particular the donors that matter the most at this moment in time. So when is the right time to actually dive into this? So you have three key ingredients, okay? And I tried to boil this down as simply as possible. You have to have the right data. Before we can do any type of data analysis, and this goes well beyond the scope of fundraising report card, this could be on the program side of your organization. Before we can do any analysis, we need the right data. And to get the right data, we need to acknowledge what is my end goal. Now, the way that you can identify your end goal is generally pretty simple. someone is usually going to ask you a question. And that question may be, what was our retention rate last year? So your end goal is now to figure out what the retention rate is. The right data for that situation would be your donation data from your donors, right? 9 out of 10 times, someone's going to pose a question to you, and that question is going to need some sort of analysis or some sort of data. And you'll have to think, okay, what is my end goal? That's how you'll identify the right data. You're going to need the right time. Now, I put here that that's most likely right now, because if someone's recently asked you a question, or if you've self-posed this question as we've been walking through this, if you've asked yourself as we're gone through the presentation, what is my donor lifetime value? I wonder what my donor lifetime value is of an under $100 donor. The right time to actually figure that out is actually now. And the reason it's now is because it's actually not as complex. It's not as sophisticated. You don't need to sit down for a week to calculate that information now, thanks to resources like Fundraising Report Card, or if your database already does it within there. If that wasn't the case, and that's why it says most likely, if you need to do a more formal analysis, if you need to do a more sophisticated analysis, then you really need to think through when is the right time. So if you get proposed or pose the question about modifying an end-of-year giving campaign or something like that in November, that is not the right time to do a formal analysis on your end-of-year giving campaign, because all the other things that you have your hands involved in take precedence, right? You'll push that off. The right time for that will probably be, March or February of the following year. But for relatively straightforward things, right now is most likely the right time. So we have right data, we have right time, and we have the right person. And another not so fun answer here, it's probably you. Especially if you're on this presentation and you're a development director or something like that, and you're thinking about lifetime value, then yeah, it's probably you. Organizations, larger organizations, they might have a whole data department and sophisticated tools and resources and things like that. That's when you can delegate or ask for some help in that regard. But right now, if we're thinking, and we'll come back to just lifetime value or growth rates or something like that, the right person to do that analysis is you, because you're the one working with development data, right? If your program coordinator asks you to do some program analysis on how effectively, we're defeating childhood obesity, right? You're not the right person. Hopefully that person never comes to you with that question. You'd imagine they wouldn't. But if it's relevant to your field, if it's relevant to your responsibilities within the organization, and you're at an organization that doesn't have a separate analysis department, you're probably the right person. But that's why tools like Fundraising Report Card and others out there exist. Tableau, for example. I mean, things like that exist to try and help you be more efficient. And it isn't that simple. This is the link back to that blog article for the Data Bank, which is another organization out there that helps nonprofits. Give that a read. It goes deeper in depth from what we just discussed here. It's difficult to digest everything in 3 slides, so I'd highly recommend giving that a read. And then where to start when you get back to work. So we've addressed the when component, but where do I actually start? And I have here, it's a marathon, not a sprint, because that's the truth. Everything we've talked about today is actually discussing, performing analysis, a lot of it related to, donor data. But we haven't even touched on data hygiene or things like that, building a culture of data analysis within an organization. This is a marathon, not a sprint. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. I'm only touching on one portion of it. With that being said, I spent the beginning of the year, actually it was the end of last year and then published throughout the beginning of the year, creating this reference guide. Please, it's not short, but it's worthy. I think it's worthy of your time, especially if the concepts that we've touched on today are interesting to you. This is a good place to start. Beyond that, read another good book that touches on this subject. I hate to throw a bunch of reading material, but Steve McLaughlin, he's on like a world book tour, but he wrote an awesome book called Data Driven Nonprofits. The link there, I think, takes you to Amazon. I don't remember how much the book costs, but it is worth it. And it is a great read for yourselves, but also maybe for a board member or someone else internally. It is success stories of how organizations are using data to drive their organization. And it is not a humongous sales pitch for Blackbaud. I was really pleased by that. It is a really good quality book. Highly recommend starting here as well. And then the idea is to have discussions about data internally. So take your growth rate metrics to the next meeting. Take your lifetime value metrics to your next board presentation. You will blow them away. And it's all about starting to have that conversation. Yep, here you go. Take the growth rates. It's simple, but it's a great place to start. You will impress your colleagues, you will impress your staff, and you will start to all have questions about what you're seeing. And here you go. Create that dialogue. Staff meetings, board meetings, etc. And here you go. Here is the end goal. Not really, but this is another fun cartoon. After careful consideration of all 437 charts, graphs, and metrics, I've decided to throw them up my hands, hit the liquor store, and get snockered. I don't know what snockered means, but I still like this this cartoon. Who's with me? We don't want to end up there, right? We want to start simple. We don't want to spend a month working on data to create some abstract dashboards. It's relatively straightforward stuff that we're talking about. Once a month, once a quarter, let's dive into the numbers and let's use that to help inform our decision making. And it's like kind of a personal habit of mine at this point. I can't make it throughout a presentation without recommending Steve Krug's book, Don't Make Me Think. It's about presenting data and information, in particular on the web, but in general to people. You don't want to make your colleagues think about stuff too much. Awesome read. Also plays nicely into my little final slide here, which is I'm happy to help you think. So with that in mind, we've hit the top of the hour pretty much. Please get in touch. I wake up in the morning, I come to the office, and I generally get on phone calls with development directors and folks like that to have conversations about how they can leverage data, start using data, do those board meetings more effectively, etc. So with that being said, I'm going to grab quite a few sips of water here and hope for a few questions to come in. But if not, if there aren't any questions, we'll hang tight just for a moment to see if there are. There is a survey after the presentation, so as you leave, please fill out that survey. There's going to be a question about the value you received in the presentation, what your fundraising goals are related to data, something along those lines, and if you're interested in working more with me on a training session. So please consider those questions. Now bear with me, getting a sip of water, and please, any questions I would love to address. So thank you. So in the past, I've gotten in the habit of, pretending people have asked questions and then making up questions as we go. But I'm not going to do that today. We don't have any questions, so please follow up with me one-to-one if you are interested. I do thank you all so much for your time. I know we had scheduled a half an hour for Q&A, but you live and you learn. And thank you so much to Kindful, who has also sponsored this presentation. If you're not familiar with Kindful, great CRM, online donation pages, fantastic tool. So please look into them as well. And I look forward to hearing from some or all of you. Oh, and here we go. Don't you love when the presenter forgets to scroll down on the questions tab? All of you who sticked around, you struck gold. Okay. Okay, so here we go. So Kimber had another question. This is great. I'm glad we're recording this. So lapsed equals Libunt. Fundraising speak forgave last year, but unfortunately not this year. We called donors in that category Libunts. You are correct, Kimber. I think I may have mentioned that as I was going. Hopefully not. Or hopefully I did. Okay, so we have here a question from Merritt. If we're using Kindful, what are the additional costs of adding the integration with fundraising report card? Good question, Merritt. Glad I found the tab to keep scrolling on the questions. So fundraising report card, there's a free version of the tool and there's an upgraded version of the tool, professional version. my recommendation would be start the integration with the free tool. So just sign up for free and integrate your data. And then depending on the amount of data that's analyzed, prices range from about $200 for the year all the way up. And we have some really large organizations that are paying well above $5,000 a year. But I don't be intimidated by that. $200 at the low end, much higher at the high end. So please, though, sign up for free. We have here a question that is LOL. Thank you. Zach, I'm relatively new to Kindful. Does it lend itself to the metrics you have just discussed? Leanna. So Leanna, that's part of the reason why Kindful went down the path of integrating with Fundraising Report Card is, of course, you can get access to lists from within Kindful. But part of why we've got the integration, the partnership with one another, is so that you can, with a few clicks of a button, get all of the visualizations and reports that we've touched on within Fundraising Report Card. So if you're not familiar, if you go to fundraisingreportcard.com/kindful, you can create an account right there, and you enter in, you really just like click a button and authenticate Fundraising Report Card, and then you're good to go. Kimber said thank you. You're very welcome, Kimber. Thank you for all the questions. Kathy, how do you calculate donor acquisition costs? Okay, Kathy, thank you for asking me that. I have a blog post that I had wrote, and actually it's part of, and I'll come back here to the presentation, it's part of this data-driven fundraising reference guide, fundraisers reference guide. I think it is section 3 of the guide. So if you go to that URL, section 3, there is a spreadsheet that you can download. I think it's actually a Google sheet or an Excel sheet. You can download it or use the Google sheet, and it's a template for calculating donor acquisition costs. We didn't go too deep into it, but you would calculate acquisition costs, again, not on your entire file or anything like that, but on a per campaign basis. So if you know you're doing a direct mail appeal, sometime this year, you would factor in all the expenses for the actual appeal. You can, and I talk about this further in the reference guide, you can include overhead expenses and things like that. So please take a look at the template, and that'll help you figure out exactly what your donor acquisition costs are. Great question. Thanks for bringing that up. And Kimber, thank you. I did mention live bunts. Thank you. Okay, we got a little bit of a longer question here from Danielle. Does Fundraising Report Card have any options if we're integrating straight from, in this case, it's little green light, that helps us look at specific funds? And this is a common concern. So our data gets kind of skewed, putting both capital and annual funds in the same reports. Fantastic question, Danielle. So through the integration, and this is true with Kindful and all of our other partners as well, and we're working on making it better, it's going to pull in all of your donation data. So when you're looking at a growth dashboard or an acquisition dashboard, it's going to be all of your fundraising data, not segmented by appeal or anything like that. Now, with that being said, what you can do is manually upload data to Fundraising Report Card. Fundraising Report Card relies on just 3 fields of information: a donor ID, a donation date, and a donation amount. So with that being said, what we do with a lot of little Greenlight users, Kindful users, etc., is you'll export a list from your CRM of all annual fund donors. So you'll do you'll do a query within your CRM. This is how Razor's Edge users and eTapestry users really get the most out of Fundraising Report Card as well. Do a query for all funds or donation type matches, annual fund, and then export out those 3 columns. Now, with all that being said, it's a little bit tricky still. We have some step-by-step guides, and I'm here, of course, to help if you're interested in doing like a one-to-one session. I'm happy to walk you through exactly how to do that. So I hope that answers your question, Danielle. Sorry it's not perfect. Lee says, thank you. Thank you, Lee. Or Leanna. How do we get the slides from this presentation? You'll be getting an email relatively soon. Bear with me. Gonna drink some more water and stuff before I send the email out. I did start the recording about 10 minutes late. I apologize, I'd forgotten. So, well, now anyone who's listening to the recording, there you go. That's the reason why the first 10 minutes are not there. But I will include the link to the slides. Those will be downloadable, so you can click on all these links that you're seeing. And in addition to that, the recording will be up online, and we'll send out a link to that as well. Gandhi here mentions, thank you for this time. It is a blessing. Okay, I appreciate that you can send us the presentation. Absolutely. I this is what I do. I love doing this. So thank you for lending me some of your time. And Danielle with a thank you. So I thought we had no questions, and I even admitted that I didn't prepare fake questions to fill up the time. So there you go. There's the inside scoop on what goes on behind the scenes here. If we don't have questions, glad that everyone that did ask a question, I'm glad I saw this little tab here and scrolled down. Any other questions that do come to mind? I know we covered a ton of information. It was 140 slides that we just went through. Okay, so we covered a ton of information in 67 minutes or so. So please, if anything comes up, I'll pull it up here just once more. My information, there's my email. The phone number, I'm extension 7, I think. Well, listen to the little, I think I'm extension 7, but there's a little menu when you call that number. That's my office phone number. It goes through to my cell phone. I don't feel great admitting that, but it's the truth. So if I don't pick it up, you're going to come through to my cell phone. So I promise I'll get back to you. So we try and be as high touch as we can here and help you get the most out of what you're trying to do at your organization, especially the smaller shops. So with all that being said, I just want to thank you all once more for your time. Please fill out that survey. And again, thanks so much. I hope you all got something useful out of this. Bye-bye now.